We'll get started here. My name is Jim Ogden. I'm the staff historian here at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. Many of you all already know that because you're the veterans of our other walks today, but I do notice a few new faces to our group. Joining me tonight to help present this 150th anniversary program are Park Rangers Anton Heinlein and Park Ranger Lee White, who wandered. There he is. He wandered off in that direction. He's back there waving the OR in the air. So he's still got his strength enough to hoist the OR this week in the day.
As long as that's happening.
But I do appreciate you all coming out tonight to consider some of the events that happened on this ground, now very devastated, shocked, bloody ground as a result of continuous fighting that has begun just shortly after dawn, and in particular after about 7:30 in the morning in 1863. Including right on this very ground where we stand right now. The fight had surged south during the course of the day, but now as the sun lowered in the west and in the smoky forest, smoky not just from the discharge of all of the weapons, but also from the little brush fires that have gotten started, including one here in the Brock Field, even setting fire to a few of the still standing dead trees in this field from where the Brocks had cleared it. Darkness began to come seemingly earlier on that September day. And while there was the hope by many that maybe the day's action was over, there was also the concern that there might still be more fighting. What we're going to do this evening is look at what happens on that evening of September the 19th. We're in the interest of being able to move the group efficiently around, often on parts of the battlefield where there is limited trails and passageways. We're going to split the group up. Anton is going to do the perspective of Dodge's Union Brigade, Preston Smith's Confederate Brigade of Tennesseans, and Deschler's Brigade of Texans, seasoned with a few Arkansans. And Lee is going to do primarily the perspective of Deschler's Brigade, and I'm going to take folks and go to the left, towards the left end of the Union line at that time, and the right of Cleburne's division sector, and look at the action in the area of Winfrey Field. So if you have a particular interest in the Tennesseans of, say, Preston Smith's brigade or the Texans, you might want to choose to go with either Anton or Lee, or you can accompany me as we walk over to the Winfrey Field area. So, Lee and Anton, anything you want to add at this moment? Yes, sir.
Which brigade are you taking?
I'll be going to the to Cleburne's right, center and right, and so Sam Wood's Alabamans, Lucius Polk's mixed brigade of Tennesseans and Arkansans. So 35th Tennessee and Lucius Polk's brigade. So and seeing the critter on your hat, you might want to go along with me. So. Okay, so for just a moment for my group, because one of the things that we get to do in this walk is walk along much of the Union line. Maybe not exactly right along the line, but certainly along at least behind the line, or until we cross through it and then out in front of it. We won't go the full length, but we will pass along much of the line. we were to go into the woods here at this point, and go on off to the southeast, we would come to the monuments that mark the position of Dodge's brigade, the right flank of Richard Johnson's division, as they are deployed as a result of the fighting here on the afternoon of September the 20th. And so now, as we walk on northeastward here, we're going to be passing across the rear of Johnson's division. And I'll stop a couple more times and put those troop positions on the ground as we go. You'll see the back of the monument to the 77th Pennsylvania. I can see the tip of the shell pyramid to Preston Smith, but that is Dodge's sector. From the rear of that line and through it, we are now out in front of the 49th Ohio on your left and the 32nd Indiana to your right rear. No, they're not on the move. They're stationary. We're walking along the length of the Union lines. The monument to the 15th Kentucky, 15th Ohio, scribing that Union line, is the one that you see on your left. George Winfrey's cornfield. The Union line being scribed by the monuments that I've been pointing out, ran up through where the 15th Ohio monument is that we walked past. The line continued across the corner of the field there where you see the monument to the 1st Ohio. Particularly right here in this sector, the man of the 1st Ohio took advantage of being at the corner of the field where the 5-foot-high split-rail zigzag worm fence was around that western and northern edge of Winfrey Field. They've knocked the fence down, piled the rails up to create some crude field fortifications. The Union line then continued on through the rest of Philemon Baldwin's brigade, as marked by the monument to the 93rd Ohio, and extended into the woods just a little bit further. Now, early in the morning, the 2nd Union Division to become engaged, Absalom Baird's division, was driven in disorder from the area to the north of us. They had withdrawn northward and then reorganized up along the Reeds Bridge Road and back to the east, and just back to the west, and just east of the Lafayette Road. By late afternoon, both Scribner's and Starkweather's brigades are relatively reorganized, and they are moved back out, and they go into position just to the left rear of Richard Johnson's division, those two brigades. The 3rd Brigade of that division, the regular brigade, more heavily shocked by the action of that morning, is left back in the Cedar Glade, just to the east of the Lafayette Road, and astride the Reeds Bridge Road, where they are continuing to reorganize, refit. And so Baird brings only 2 of those regiments back out. Now, this line that I have been describing as we have walked along it had developed during the course of the day on September the 19th as the Union line, or as the Army of the Cumberland, particularly in this sector, George Thomas, committed additional divisions, and the line extended further south. As the fight had developed during the course of the day, George Thomas had repeatedly ridden from the Lafayette Road and the Kelly Field area out eastward to check on the status of the fighting along the line. And as he rode back and forth multiple times, he noticed that just east of the Lafayette Road, and running parallel with the Lafayette Road, running north and south, and just to the east of the Kelly Field, inside the woods, was a low rise of ground. That low rise of ground, as I said, ran parallel with the Lafayette Road, and Thomas saw that and said, or thought that that would be a good place to anchor a repositioned Union line in preparation for any continued fighting here. That afternoon, about 3 o'clock or so, when there is a lull in the action out in this area, Thomas has ridden out, and he is talking to Baird and Johnson and Palmer, and telling them that he has identified a terrain feature, that low rise of ground, which would be a good place to anchor a new line. And he says, since there is a lull, I want you to ride with me back and I will show you that ground. Communicating by courier or message or even in person is one thing. How much more valuable is it to take someone and show them what it is you're talking about? Thomas will take them back to that low rise of ground and show them that ground. And he will say, at dark, I want you to begin a withdrawal back to that low rise of ground. Now, as a result of the fighting, Palmer's division, even before dark, is beginning to withdraw back towards the Kelly Field area. They don't, as they do pull back, they don't initially take up positions on that low rise, but soon thereafter they will begin to reorient in that area. And so as Palmer faded back, pulled away, the Union line out here is left as Richard Johnson's division, Dodge's brigade, then Villick's brigade, and Baldwin's brigade here, and then beyond, and set back just a little bit, is the two brigades, Scribner and Starkweather, of Baird's division. The troops, particularly right here, are hunkered down behind their log works. This is the Union line. They've got their defense rail works. They've got their skirmishers out in front. And the sun begins to lower, darkness begins to settle on the field, and the officers begin to anticipate making that movement to the rear. So you all know where the Union line is. You all know something more clearly than many of the Confederates do. All right. Questions or observations here? Yes, sir.
Did Rosecrans know about Thomas' plan to move back?
Probably not at this time when he is doing that. Certainly when they meet after dark for the Council of War, it's possible that Thomas may have tried to communicate that to Rosecrans in some fashion, but there's not any clear evidence that I can think of that he did. As a corps commander, Thomas has pretty great latitude to operate within his sector, which is the left half of the Union line as it is developed.
Can you describe a little bit the command and control with Crittenden Thomas as Rosecrans is feeding divisions and getting all intermingled, and who's managing the actual battlefield situation throughout the day? Okay.
As a result of the importance of needing to maintain their connection with Chattanooga, the importance of the Lafayette Road, as this fight grew in size, the Rosecrans begins to direct the movement of troops to meet the current threat at that time. In part because Reynolds' division had halted for the men to cook breakfast at dawn, Richard Johnson's division, the first of McCook's troops, coming up behind Thomas's three divisions of Baird, Brannan, and Reynolds, Johnson actually passes Reynolds as Reynolds is on the side of the road as men cooking breakfast. But as the fight developed and Thomas needs more troops, the most immediately available troops are Richard Johnson's men. And Richard Johnson is told to report to George Thomas and take your orders and direction from George Thomas. A little bit later in the morning, when John Palmer's division is sent up from Crittenden's Corps at Lee and Gordon's Mill, the same thing is said. John Palmer, you now respond or are under the direction of George Thomas. This is a very different situation than what is happening in Bragg's army as divisions begin to get piecemealed in for Bragg's army. In Bragg's army, divisions are being sent into other sectors, but often not with clear assignment to someone else. And so you don't have as much command and control. But in the Union Army, these divisions that are being assigned to Thomas clearly know they work for Thomas. So, all right. Well, let's walk just a little bit further. Our brigade in Cleburne's attack is the mixed brigade of Sterling Alexander Martin Woods, Mississippians, and Alabamans. They had lined up back there on the Jays Mill Road, and now they are advancing westward as well, except that their brigade commander is not advancing with them. Sterling Alexander Martin Wood has had a little problem with courage. This is not the first time at Stones River and at Perryville as well. In fact, Cleburne and Hardee have talked with him, saying that if in the next engagement you are not better able to manifest the appropriate courage for a brigade commander, then you'll need to relinquish brigade command. And on this evening of the 19th, as darkness settled on the field, particularly in the woods, and as they advanced into this wooded environment where there is naturally limited visibility and that visibility reduced by the smoke, the brigade goes forward with no guide or very little guidance, certainly above the regimental level. The brigade integrity is going to begin to break down, and there will be some resulting friendly fire casualties in the brigade. The brigade is deployed with Hawkins Battalion of Sharpshooters on the right, then the 32nd and 45th Mississippi, the 45th Alabama in the center of the brigade, the 16th Alabama, and then the 33rd Alabama on the left end of the brigade. One soldier in the 33rd Alabama will write, "The afternoon of the 19th, we hurried to the Chickamauga Creek at Bedford's Ford, and after taking off our shoes, socks, pants, and drawers, walked through it and put on our clothes." He is one soldier who did get to undress before crossing. Then about sunset, formed in line of battle and advanced across a field, and coming to a worm rail fence, pushed at alternate or opposite corners as we had been instructed to do on coming to such a fence. Now these fences that were around all of these fields, the farmers would allow the corners to grow up with brush and vegetation and little saplings and vines. All of this helped to actually keep the fences, the rails stacked, and to keep animals away from the rails to try to push through at different places. And so one of these stacked rail fences would not look like as neat as those around the Brotherton farm back there. And we've put those up a number of years ago, and I still can't convince the maintenance guys that they don't have to mow in the fence corners. In fact, the reason you're not seeing any more put up is they don't want to have to mow around any more fence corners. Well, you don't. You let all the fence corners grow up, and pretty soon you have kind of a brushy strip where your fence is. And every few years, you take the fence down, burn that strip off, and then if you want the fence in the same place, you put it back up again. But one of the reasons they use the stacked rail fences like this in this area is it allowed you to make easy adjustments to the size of your fields. let's say that this year one of your sons has gotten old enough to really be good labor in the field with you. What might you choose to do? Farm just a little more area so that you can make a little more crop to then have a little more to sell on the regional, national, and even world market of the time. But so these fences with the grown-up fence rows, the fence corners, are major obstacles. Just try to imagine going into one of those corners and trying to push it down yourself. At least in Sam Wood's brigade, there is evidence that they had actually drilled at how to deal with such a fence. And that is, the men would go into those corners of the fence, put their shoulders against the rails, and then on one command, all push forward at the same time and literally knock down and scatter the fence in front of them. Why would you want to do that? To save you having to climb over it. What did we just talk about a minute ago about the firing in the darkness? Soldiers have a tendency to shoot high. Where are there more bullets on a Civil War battlefield? Here, here, here. You climb over a fence, what are you often climbing up into? The fire of the enemy. And so, if you got to get from one side of a fence to another, the easy thing to do would be to knock the fence down. In fact, there are on some battlefields of the Civil War, it is described that officers anticipating a potential movement across an area would send details out to knock fences down ahead of time or to make gaps in the fences. And in fact, in the famous photographs taken on the Antietam battlefield, you can even see these probably purposely made gaps in some of the post and rail fences that appear in those photographs to allow passage through them. In the woods, we passed over a line of our men who had been lying down. Walker's men, who recognized our blue flag with the white disc and cheered us as we passed. In front, we soon encountered the Federal line of infantry and artillery, who checked us at first, but gave way. Then we pursued them in the dark, routing them each time they would attempt to make a stand. They halted and lay down in line of battle in the woods without taking off any, we then lay down in the woods without taking off any of our belongings except shoes and blankets. In advancing and fighting in the dark, some laggards persisted in shooting from the rear of the front part of the line. And such a one of our men killed Adjutant A.M. Moore, son of ex-Governor Moore, by shooting him in the neck accidentally from the rear. He was not an enemy, but an excited soldier. Some were scolded for such, being named with an exhibition of feeling that was quite plain. It was not supposed that Adjutant Moore had an enemy in the regiment, he had not having trouble with anyone. Furthermore, he was probably the best liked of all our soldiers, all of whom we liked and respected. His body was carried and left on a litter immediately in rear of the right of the regiment, remaining with us until next morning when it was started home in charge of his Negro cook. Part of this problem with this firing is the breakdown of discipline in Sam Wood's brigade as they advance, not only in this difficult terrain, but also without Sam Wood as their guidance. Sam Wood's line, particularly the center and right of it, is pushing out into to this field, out into the open, where there's a little more daylight. But also, what can they see more clearly from right there at the edge of the woods, where the Federal line is, marked by the flashes of the muzzles of those Federal rifles and muskets. So, let's walk over onto the Federal line.
Jim, can I ask
You may.
a personal question? 24th Mississippi lost a Hardee flag, the blue flag, on Lookout Mountain. Why would Walker's troops, of which they were members, cheer Cleburne's and Hardee flag if they somebody
Well,
already had it?
actually, Walthall does not lose Hardee pattern flags on Lookout Mountain.
Really?
Yeah, really. Yeah. Walthall's brigade is not carrying Hardee pattern flags. There are Hardee pattern flags captured on Lookout Mountain. They are attributed, even by some Federals at that time, to Walthall's brigade, but they are not, Walthall's brigade is not carrying Hardee pattern flags. None of the regiments of Walthall's brigade actually lost their flag. Even the 34th Mississippi, which was in the most difficult position, did not lose their colors. Those flags were found in the baggage of Moore's Alabama brigade. Even Federals at the time, not understanding, none of the flags are marked, and they weren't even in use. Since they had battled Walthall's brigade primarily, they thought that this baggage they found was Walthall's brigade, but it actually was Moore's, the stuff in Moore's brigade camp. So.
Govan's brigade, they had Hardee flags.
They do, right. There are quite a few of the Buckner, Hardee, Cleburne style flags, the blue field with the white disc in the center and the white trim here. All of Cleburne's division has them. Stewart's division has them. Fulton's brigade, or Johnson's brigade, which had been in Stewart's division, has now been detached. They have them. In fact, if you had to say what was the predominant color of a Confederate regimental battle flag here at Chickamauga, that color would be blue. The blue fields of the Hardee flag, the blue fields of the Polk style flags, the blue fields of the McAllen or Alabama style flags. So there are probably more, there's probably more blue on Confederate flags here than any other color. There are relatively few St. Andrew's Cross style flags here. Based on the evidence that is available right now, unless Greg has found some more, Greg Biggs, who's right now the leading flag expert, there are 11 different pattern Confederate battle flags in use here in the Battle of Chickamauga. That doesn't even count variations such as, the Hardees. Does it have a circular disc, or does it have an ovoid disc? There isn't one Confederate battle flag here, and there are at least two more patterns that come with the battles for Chattanooga. So 11 different patterns.
So because units, would transfer to one place.
It wasn't bad. Well, when it starts getting dark, then you have no idea how long you've been walking or anything like that. But it got me
AP Hill wearing that
just
red
at the very,
shirt.
very end. So
That's what T says all the time. You
divide and conquer.
ever looked and seen how many posts he has?
And I was one of those
Sicilian, right?
Now the Union line that Cleburne is striking in this sector, and here it is, the 1st Ohio. Lieutenant Colonel Bassett Langdon of the 1st Ohio will write about this this situation here. After having repulsed Confederates, his regiment was called back to the edge of the woods, but skirmishers remained in the woods beyond the field to the front. And Langdon will say, about sunset, my skirmishers were pressed back with serious loss to within a few yards of the regiment, where they were exposed to so hot a fire from the enemy that I recalled them to tempt the enemy into the open field. Finding the enemy not disposed to enter the open, and firing having increased on my right, I sent Company A again into the field as skirmishers to prevent the enemies getting again into the field, to prevent the enemies getting too close to my front unobserved, the nature of the ground being such as to raise an apprehension of that character. In fact, as you look out into the field, where is the actual crest? It's out there in front. And he's concerned that they might be able to approach beyond that little crest. This company was in the act of deploying when it found itself exposed to a very hot fire on its right flank, and immediately took position to meet it and open fire warmly in return. At this instant, General Villick's regiment on my immediate right opened fire in line, and warned by all these indications where the real attack would come, I hastily recalled the skirmishers, intending to meet it by a volley at short range. Unfortunately, the recall of the skirmishers, who fell back firing, and the heavy roll of musketry on my right, with the whistling of the enemy's bullets, set the guns of my right company going, and an irregular file fire ran along my front from right to left, mainly directed to the enemy in my front. Meantime, I strove in vain to make myself heard to stop the firing and to call the regiment to attention. In 30 seconds, the regiment on my right was broken and running to the rear in great confusion. And while I was striking my men who were lying down with the flat of my sword to get their attention, the rebel line was seen within 40 yards of my right flank, moving rapidly up, perpendicular to it. I was barely able to get my men to their feet in time to see the rebel colors flaunted almost in their faces, and their guns being mostly unloaded. I directed them to retire. The regiment fell back 150 yards, and rallying handsomely upon the colors, delivered a withering fire upon the enemy, which checked his advance and drew in return a storm of grape, canister, and musketry. The contest raged till long after darkness, and the dense smoke of battle had shut out everything from view but the flash of the enemy's guns, and only terminated when the enemy ceased to return our fire. Part of the perception of the withdrawal of Federals was a reaction to Thomas's orders to, at dark, relocate to that low rise of ground. And indeed, some of the units along this line had already begun to do that when the skirmish fire erupted out in their front. And those units will have to be halted, in a couple of cases even moved back into the line to then open fire. But at the same time, the pressure of the Confederates are going to force the line back. As Philemon Baldwin's brigade in this area takes the shock of the Confederate attack and begins to get a little disordered, Philemon Baldwin, the brigade commander, the colonel of the 6th Indiana, but the senior colonel in the brigade, and hence the brigade commander, rides in amongst some of his men, and he actually orders a charge. And as they go charging forward, a Confederate volley is delivered, and Baldwin goes down. Baldwin's body is never recovered. He was apparently plainly dressed, and probably some souveniring by Confederates shortly after his fall meant that in the aftermath of his death, he was no longer recognizable as a general officer. But his fall this evening, 150 years ago, was commemorated by the Park Commission as the National Military Park is created by the erection of one of those three-sided 15-high shell pyramids on the battlefield. One of 8 on the battlefield that marked the spot where brigade commanders, 5 brigadier generals, and 3 colonels were killed or mortally wounded in this fighting on September the 19th and 20th. Now, as Cleburne's men had pushed up towards this line, the artillery of Wood's and Polk's brigades attempted to support as best as possible. But the guns had a difficult time moving through the thick woods. But as darkness settled on the field, they began to have some opportunity to potentially get forward on the ground. And both Thomas Key's battery of Polk's brigade and Semple's battery of Wood's brigade are going to push up and move into the field under the cover of darkness and move up to within, they said, 60 yards of the Union line. And as Thomas Key said, let fly the dogs of war. The guns will fire at that short range, trying to blow a hole in the Union line. To the left rear of Johnson, Scribner's and Starkweather's brigade attempt to wheel to get into the action. They actually wind up wheeling towards one another and fire. And just at that moment, some of the Confederates closing will fire as well, actually catching some of those Federals with both front and flank fire. Frontal fire from friends, flank and rear fire from some Confederates. But under this pressure, the Federal line is going to begin to pull back. Cleburne's line will move forward itself and will occupy the Union position and push on just a little bit further with some firing continuing in the woods further to the west. But soon the Federals will withdraw far enough to the west that the action will die down, and Cleburne's division will stop and bivouac along the line where they halted. Having driven the Federals back, some of them think a mile, in actuality less than that, but they have driven the line back and then are going to try to bivouac for the night. In the aftermath, one of the soldiers in the 1st Arkansas will write, "When night fell, the engagement was stopped. Throwing out skirmishers, we found the lines were mixed up terribly. We were among the Yankees, and they were calling, 'What command is this?'" This is scattered elements of Johnson and Baird as they tried to withdraw. It was midnight before the lines were reformed. Then we had a night's sleep on the ground, knowing that on the morrow some of us would fall in defense of our country. Some of us would never see home and mother again. We bivouacked there that night. It was cold, big frost next morning. We heard the enemy at work on fortifications all night. They made a good job, too. To the Confederates, the night was more or less feverish from anxiety for the morrow. The constant chopping and felling of trees in the front kept them awake to the probabilities of a desperate contest the next day. There was but one feeling among the men, and that was the necessity of making an attack at daylight before the enemy's works were finished. And with this, the view they were in line at the earliest light and ready for action. But as darkness settled and the men began to hear the Federal preparations in their front, some would look around and notice there was other activity going on this scene of now basically a day-long battle. The fury of the battle was scarcely ended when the prowlers began searching the field for booty. And as each one came back with acquisitions of money, finger rings, tobacco, haversacks, knapsacks, blankets, and the like, fresh parties started out and prowled all night, some of them going as far as the enemy's lines. The United States soldiers, while encamped on Lookout Mountain, had manufactured finger rings of laurel root, which is abundant on that mountain. Numbers of these were collected, and in some instances, the brutal prowlers unjointed the stiffened fingers in order to remove them. In fact, our own dead were robbed without a scruple. The darker side of humanity is now evident on this battlefield in yet another way. A soldier who fell is probably not on the ground more than a few seconds before someone, probably first a comrade, is going through his pockets, his haversack, his knapsack, looking for his valuables. All of the bodies will be thoroughly proud, as this one soldier will note by the end of the fight. So put yourself now in the shoes of the man of Cleburne's division, now going to bivouac in the ground out there to our north. Only a sporadic firing, scattered on the field the rest of the night. But what's the anticipation for the morrow? Soaked with perspiration from the evening's activities, wet from fording the creek, cold, close enough to the enemy that there can't be any fires, casualties all around them. How many of the men got any useful sleep that night? Questions or observations?
Was it Cleburne's men that were cooking rations in the morning?
Well, they're not cooking them. They will be issued rations the next morning, yes. And for Cleburne's men, they are now basically 24 hours since they have last been issued rations.
About where did they end up at?
They're going to push into the woods here a couple hundred yards. Are you familiar where on the battlefield John Ingram's grave is located?
Yes.
There is a tablet there for Lucius Polk's brigade, which is supposed to indicate where they started the assault on the morning of the 20th from. And so that would be off in this direction about 400 yards. I think that might be, they move up to that morning, but they do push into the woods from here a couple of hundred yards.
From this morning, the only ground that changed hands was at the end of the day when Cleburne reinforced and came up here and took this ground across the field here from north to south.
You can say that, yes. But you know, what does getting this ground really do to help the Confederates? The Confederates, another Confederate division has now been committed. Cleburne doesn't have tremendous casualties, but he has some. His men have been in the shock of combat. What has been gained by Cleburne's assault versus having kept a division fully fresh for commitment the next morning?
They would have fallen back anyhow, wouldn't they?
The Federals, right. The Federals, if the Confederate attack had started probably 15 or 30 minutes later, there probably wouldn't have been any Federals out here except some skirmishers. So.
Where was the high ground that Thomas had identified?
It is where Battle Line Road is today. Where they'll build that new line, which will be the subject of the 8:30 talk tomorrow morning. So.
Lucius Polk related to Leonidas Polk?
He is. Lucius Polk is the nephew of Leonidas Polk. So. Alrighty, well, we need to go back down onto the pavement and make a right-hand turn and head back towards our starting point. I will pause one place along the way, so in just a moment I'll dash out to the front of the column. Yeah, hopefully, yes, if somebody organizes. Well, folks, I appreciate your attention during the course of the day. I really appreciate you all being here on this anniversary date to recognize the important events that helped shape this campaign, helped shape the war itself, and our nation's course since these events on this now 18th and 19th. And I guess we'll have to see whether or not the two armies are still here to fight another day when dawn comes tomorrow morning.
Bright and early tomorrow morning.
Yeah, look for Mr. Heinlein tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. in the Winfrey Field. And I'll look forward to seeing you at 8:30.